All right, so today we are going to put all of the elements of subtracting mixed numbers together, and we are going to work on problems where we have to regroup and then we have to find the common denominator. Okay, so let's get started. So I'm going to start first with 3 1/3 minus 1 5/6. So first things first, let's look at these fractions. So I know 5/6 is greater than 1/3. So I know that I am going to have to regroup 3 1/3. So I do that by taking out a whole. So my 3 is going to become 2 because I am trading it with a whole. Then I am going to add 3/3 to 1/3. So when I do that, I get 2 4/3. So now I need to subtract 1 5/6 from it. Okay, so again, I notice that they don't have common denominator, so I need to go ahead and I need to find one. A lot of you, I noticed yesterday, are not finding the least common denominator, okay? You're still multiplying 3 times 6, okay? You don't need to do that. And when we start getting up into higher numbers, that's where you're going to probably make mistakes, because the higher the number, the more mistakes we usually make. So I'm going to stress, again, to think about, is one a multiple of the other? So with 3 and 6 here, I know that 6 is a multiple of 3. So I'm not even going to change 5/6. Okay, because I know that if I skip count by 3, I'm going to hit 6. So then I only have to change one fraction, okay, because I know that 3 times 2 equals 6, okay? So what I do to the bottom, I have to do to the top. So now 4 times 2 equals 8, okay? So I am going to go ahead and subtract 5/6 from 8/6, and I get 3/6, okay? Now I need to subtract my whole numbers. 1 minus 2 is 1, and I get 1 3/6, which is also equivalent to 1 1/2. All right, let's try another one. So I have 5 3/10 and 3 1/2, okay? So already I can see here that 1/2 is greater than 3/10. So I have to regroup this number. Okay, so in order to do that, my 5 is going to become a 4 because I'm going to borrow a whole number. So because I'm borrowing, I'm going to add 10/10 to 3/10. Okay, because I'm borrowing a whole for 10/10. So when I do that, I get 4 13/10. Okay, so now I'm going to bring my 3 1/2 down. Okay, so again, yesterday we had a problem where we had a denominators of 2 and 10. And a lot of you said, well, a common denominator is 20. Yes, you're right, a common denominator is 20, but that is not the least common denominator. Because if I ask myself, is one a multiple of the other, I know that if I skip count by 2, I will hit 10. Therefore, I don't need to rename this fraction because I know that 10 is the least common denominator of both of them. So I'm going to multiply 2 by a factor of 5, which is going to give me 10. What I do to the bottom, I do to the top. So I am going to be now subtracting 13/10 minus 5/10, which is 8/10, okay? And then 4 minus 3 is 1. So I get 1 8/10. Now some of you might even be able to simplify 8/10 more if you recognize that you can divide 8 by 2. So if I do that, I get 1 and 4/5 as my final answer. Okay, so now we're going to get a little bit more challenging here. All right, so we have 6 1/5 minus 3 3/8. So some of you might be saying, well, I don't know if 1/5 is greater or less than 3/8. So remember those benchmark numbers that we have talked about: 0, 1.5, 1, 1.5, okay? Taking a look at 3/8, I know 3/8 is really, really close to 4/8, okay? In fact, it's only an eighth away. So 4/8 is equivalent to a half. So 3/8 is about a half. And I know that about a half is greater than a fifth, okay? So that's going to tell me that 3/8 is greater than 1/5, meaning that I'm going to have to borrow from this 6 here, okay? So in order to do that, I'm going to borrow out a whole. So my 6 is going to become 5, and I'm going to add 5/5 here to 1/5 because 5/5 is equivalent to that whole that I traded out, okay? So 1/5 plus 5/5 equals 6/5, okay? So then I'm going to bring over 3/8, okay? So again, we've got uncommon denominators here. So I know many of you might say, well, I'm thinking that the common denominator is going to be 40, but let's just double check. So if I list out my multiples here, I do hit 40. Let me just double check over here. 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 35, 40. 40 seems like a very good common denominator. Okay, so 40 is my common denominator, then I'm going to go ahead and say 40 over here, okay? I think I'll change my color so you guys don't get confused with all that writing there. Okay, so now I need to think about what factor can I multiply 5 by to get to 40. Well, I can multiply it by 8, whatever I do to the bottom, I do to the top. 6 times 8 equals 48. Okay, so now the bottom here, I need to multiply 8 times 5 because 8 times 5 is going to give me 40. When I do to the bottom, I have to do the top. So 3 times 5 is 15. Okay, so a little subtraction here. 8 minus 5 is 3, and 4 minus 1 is 3, and I get 33/40. Now, don't forget about those whole numbers over there. 5 minus 3 is 2. So I get kind of a wonky number, which is 2 and 33/40. Okay, last one here. So I'm going to set you up a little bit with this problem, and then I'm going to have you pause the video to solve it yourself, and then we'll go over it. Okay, so first off, we have to look at our fractions here and think about, can I subtract 3/4 from 2/5? So again, think about those benchmarks, okay? So I know 3/4 is gonna be almost a whole, right? It's almost it's 1/4 away from a whole, okay? So if this is about a whole and 2/5, that's gonna be about a half. Then I know I can't take about a whole away from a half. So that means that I am going to have to go ahead and borrow, okay? So that's going to be your hint there that you are going to have to borrow. So I want you to pause the video right here, solve it yourself, turn the video back on, and we'll solve it together. Go. Okay, so hopefully you have solved it. So, like I said before you paused it, you're going to have to borrow here, okay? So if you're borrowing out a whole, then the 3 becomes a 2, okay? So you are going to add 5/5, which is what you traded out for a whole, to 2/5. So 2/5 plus 5/5 equals 7/5, okay? So let's bring 2 3/4 over. Okay, so 5 and 4, I bet at this point most of you know that the least common denominator of both of those is 20, because 5, 10, 15, 20, right? 4, 8, 12, 16, 20, okay? So I know that 4 times 5 gives me 20. What I do to the bottom, I have to do to the top. Okay, so that would be 15/20. And then 5 times 4 gives me 20. What I do to the bottom, I have to do to the top. So I have 28/20 here. Okay, so subtracting 15 from 28, I get 3. 2 minus 1 is 1. So that leaves me with 13/20. If I go to my whole numbers here, I see that 2 minus 2 is 0. So my final answer is 13/20. Okay, so hopefully this is bringing back some memories and not posing too much of a challenge for you. Don't forget that today Miss Webster has a Zoom from 10 to 10:30 if you are feeling kind of funky about subtracting mixed numbers. So I would go ahead and utilize that opportunity to get some help, okay? So please do the 4 problems that I assigned for you today, and tomorrow I will be on with some more review. All right, have a good day. Bye.